So when you have Parkinson's, this autopilot's affected. You've still got all your normal motor programs in your brain, unlike a stroke, for instance, where when you have a stroke and there's widespread damage, you kind of lose some of those motor programs. But in Parkinson's, those motor programs, they're still there, but the connection to them is broken as such, or is limited. The movement retraining part is about trying to bypass that faulty autopilot and use other pathways in the brain to perform the same movements to compensate for the autopilot that's not functioning.
Hey, welcome to the Bodies Built Better podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Tan, and this show is all about human performance. I chat with athletes, coaches, authors, scientists, health professionals, and so many more on all the best tips, tools, and strategies to help you perform at your best and discover your extraordinary potential. And on this episode, I welcome back my good friend, Eileen Ting. Now, if you're not aware, I spoke with Eileen a few episodes ago now, where we talk about her journey in her injury journey. Now, she's had 3 ACL reconstructions. And when we spoke in the last episode, she came in on her crutches and she had the knee brace already, hadn't been able to put any weight through the knee at that stage. And it was such an interesting conversation around how she was coping mentally, obviously physically, and emotionally as well through that 3rd reconstruction. And of course, what she's learned from the past injuries as well. So that was really insightful, and she takes us on incredible journeys as well. She's an adventure junkie. And in this episode, the crutches are gone, the knee brace is off, and she's back to work. So we talk about the time between then and now, how she's feeling and how she's going, her goals for getting back into bouldering, how she's approaching that, the mindset she's going into it with that. And it was super interesting. And so whilst that part of the conversation, I think a lot of people will be able to relate to, especially if you've dealt with an injury, if you've dealt with setbacks that have taken you away from something you love, I really think you'll resonate with her story, and how she goes about getting through that. So that's one part of the episode. The other part of the episode is her extraordinary work that she's doing. As I mentioned, she's a neurophysio. She works with a lot of Parkinson's patients. We also touch on the vestibular system. Now, this for me was so extraordinary in what she shares with us, how she does her work, how she's helping people with those challenges. And it's just such extraordinary work, information, knowledge that needs to be shared and talked about so much more, because whilst, someone like me, I don't know too much about it. And so my ignorance tells me there's nothing you can do for it, right? But she just busts those myths and really shares how we can work with that, and how those living with Parkinson's can still live a really great quality life. And so it was just a phenomenal conversation. We also touch on the vestibular system. This was so fascinating to me. I've experienced vertigo before, so getting to know a little bit more about, I guess, the anatomy of the vestibular system, why things can occur. Super interesting. So I know you will find this as interesting as I did. Now, in all transparency, this was also an interesting day to record. I think we had to stop the interview about 5 times because there was so much happening within my apartment building. There were lots of they were testing the fire alarms, the whole building, and then they had to come into the room as well. So not only is the alarms going off throughout the episode, we also had someone knock on the door and test the alarms in in the space as well. So if you're watching the video on YouTube, you'll see that, or Spotify, you'll see that there's quite a bit of editing that had to be done. That was purely because you don't want to be hearing the sound of alarms going off. And if you're listening to it, you may hear the editing. I try really hard, obviously, to make it as smooth as possible, but I wanted to share that with you because, you know, sometimes these things aren't as smooth as they sound. There's lots of things happening. But that was really fun. You'll hear that, you know, it's always fun having someone in the studio with me having a chat, but more so when it's a friend of yours, you can really have a joke and a laugh, and that probably comes through as well. So this was such a fun episode. I hope you enjoy it. Enjoy with neurophysio Eileen Ting. How is the knee going? What's the progress?
Yes, it's 2 months. Oh, actually coming up 3 next week, which is great news because it does mean that the next step is like getting back into running, hopefully.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned last time it's like my rehab's been delayed a month because I had to spend a month on the crutches. But the strength is building up relatively rapidly, which is good, and it feels good, which fingers crossed that means that cartilage repair has taken, which is the most important thing. So it's all of that waiting and all of that patience hopefully has paid off. So excited.
I've got questions for you, Eileen.
Oh, God.
So
exam.
Exactly.
Palms are sweating.
You need to get 100%. You fail. No. So I've been doing a little bit of stalking of your Instagram.
Oh my God.
And by the way, you're a poet. Like, you're a really great writer. That's not the question. I was going to, where did that come from?
Is this one of those things where we go off on a tangent for an hour
Exactly.
and then come back to the point?
We'll do that tangent later. Otherwise.
No, there is a whole story behind that.
Oh, cool. Well, we'll get to it. Sounds good. I love a good story. Okay, so I've got a few Instagram posts here that I would love to. Yeah, I would love to explore, dive deeper into, because I think they're really interesting, and I think a lot of people will be able to resonate with them.
Okay.
So the first one that I found quite interesting and almost sad.
Yeah.
I've had the surgeon tell me he hopes that you won't be getting back to bouldering. After 3 ACLs, the risk is there. But even though I know he kind of has to say that, it hurt.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what goes through your mind when the surgeon says that to you? Because I feel like a lot of people have gone through a surgery, especially to do with their knees, especially those who love running, are being told not to run because it's bad for their knees. Like, what do you say to that? And what was your thought process around that?
At the time it was devastating to hear. And I think I could appreciate afterwards when that initial shock of that delivery settled. I appreciated that was expressed to me out of, you know, concern, that there wasn't any, you know, malice or ill will in what he said. Yeah. I mean, his job is to fix my knee and to ensure that it's a successful outcome and successful future for me. But I think in that instance, especially coming from somebody who is a physio, who My job is to put patients at the center of their goal setting. So if they tell me they want to do something, that's what we're aiming for. And we do have to manage expectations. And I think that that's ultimately what he was doing, is managing the expectation of, hey, this is your third ACL. So not only are we having to fix this one, but you are probably biomechanically prone to this type of injury, which we know that there is a predisposition for some people, just based on, the way that we move and the way that our joints move and those kinds of things.
Is your predisposition the fact that you've had?
Yes, there's part of that. I believe that the percentage of doing the other side when you've done one side is significantly higher. So yeah, I think he was ultimately, I suppose, kind of protecting his work, I suppose, making sure that the outcome of his work was going to be, successful for the long run. And he's been there from my revision surgery to this surgery. He's seen me now twice and how devastating it's been. And I think for him, he knows how devastating it would be if, what if I did do it again and I was sitting in that waiting room again and having to come and see him in a year or, down the track if I did it again. And yeah, bouldering there is some inherent risk in bouldering. It is it's a risky sport for probably those kinds of injuries. There's some truth in that risk that I think he was trying to convey, but I still had a choice.
Okay, well, let's talk about that choice, because I can imagine the choice is you want to go back, you love bouldering, you have goals.
Yeah, it was either I did or I didn't.
Yeah.
I was always going to give it a go, and I'll always give it a go if I think that I can do it sensibly.
Yeah. How would you have liked him to
deliver it? Yeah. Perhaps in a way that gives the person, me, some hope that you'll still be able to achieve what you want to achieve. And the evidence is such that there's a good chance that you will go back. But he didn't really convey that. The bluntness of it really cut that hope down in a very vulnerable time. And so that was hard to hear.
So we'll write them a letter.
Sternly. I can do that. I'm a poet, right?
You are. Oh, such a great writer.
In haiku or something. In what? Haiku. It's like a particular kind of poem. Oh, that's fine. I'll make a rhyme.
One of those.
One of those ones.
Okay, IG post.
Oh, wow. Okay, next one. We passed the first one.
Day 4, post-op.
Okay.
Kept the wristband on until today. Partly because I've been too lazy to find a pair of scissors, but mostly because it was my way of giving myself permission to feel sorry for myself post-surgery. Taking it off was symbolic of realizing it's all me now and rehab has officially begun. I'm the only one that can influence the outcome of this now. I love that so much because I feel like that's symbolic for everyone when we I hate to say it, but don't want to take accountability or don't want the responsibility of going through something that is so hard. And we use whatever it is as a crutch to go, well, I can't do that.
Kind of wear it like a badge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm like this because of that, or I can't do this because of that.
Yeah, it's my excuse.
Exactly.
This is why I'm in this.
Exactly.
This is why I'm feeling this way, or this is why I'm acting this way.
Yeah, just handing over the reins,
It
basically.
is, yeah.
And so
That's good
with
to
that,
Mm.
when you finally did that and you made that choice, how did you go from then on? Were there times where you kind of went back to that mentality, or were there times where potentially you went the complete opposite and went gung-ho and everything and maybe a little too much? Like, how did you manage that mental side of the rehab, of taking it easy on yourself, but also not, I guess, blaming the injury for anything?
We talked about trusting the process in our last episode. And I think having had that experience and having a little bit more of an idea of what to expect this time, I think has helped to ultimately be a bit more patient with my rehab than I did the first time, which translates to not pushing myself beyond what I'm being told I should do. Because for anyone that has had injuries before, it is quite easy when things are feeling good to push the limits. And I do reflect on the first ACL that I did, and the surgery itself wasn't great, which contributed to it failing. But as hard as it is to admit, I pushed myself beyond the limits that were the kind of instructions that were given to me at the time.
I went back to
running. Like? I went back to running too early. And actually, to be fair, like I didn't have a steady physio at the time, because I think in my mind I kind of thought, I'm a physio, like I can do this, and so I was kind of going by loose milestones myself, and kind of going by just like how it felt. And so I've definitely learned from that experience. So now I have somebody who is an ACL physio who's like you're not allowed to do this, and that was really important. Was someone to say, don't do that.
These are your boundaries.
Yeah, these are your boundaries.
Yeah.
And I've learnt to listen to them. And I think that's just also maturity, but also, knowing, having had the bad outcome from partly not listening to those things, and being just so eager to get back. So I think that's helped to make sure that I am being patient with the recovery, and again trusting the process and knowing that ultimately what's a few weeks, if I'm I don't need to push it, like it's going to come. And the other part of your question was whether I have those moments where I feel like I go back to blaming kind of things, external forces. Like, do I feel sorry for myself? Not as much as I have. That's one of the biggest changes, from the biggest contrasts from the last time that I can feel tangibly, is I don't spend a lot of time at the moment feeling sorry for myself. I put that down to making the choice this time not to. It was important in those first few weeks to allow myself to have some grief, because it was.
Yeah.
I'd lost a huge part of my life and my goals in a moment.
And purpose.
Yep. That purpose that I had at that time was just gone. And really appreciated the people that were close to me at the time reminding me that it was okay to feel like shit. That it was okay to ugly cry, which I did so much of in the first couple of weeks, the first few weeks, and then the weeks after surgery when I couldn't move. And that was so hard, to be sedentary and in pain. And that sucked. And I cried so much. But then once that band came off, I had a job. And that's, I think, what has helped is having that was the purpose. So the purpose had to just shift to something else. And I think I've learnt that over the years and from the past experiences is give yourself a purpose. And we talked about last time, how do you do this more gracefully? And that was my other purpose, was to get through it this time and come out of it a happier, more psychologically sound person and not become bitter and negative and depressed. And the difference was I also had then, now I've got the resources to do that. So it's like you said, make the most of what you have. And this time I had so many more resources. So I had the options, and finding meaning and purpose in suffering. Actually, this is a quote that I absolutely love is suffering ceases to become suffering when it finds a purpose. And I think that is largely true in this case, but in so many things, in all of our suffering and pain that we go through.
Yeah. And I think that's so huge and profound. And, you know, you laugh because, you know, it sounds so simple, just making the choice to not feel sorry for yourself, when actually, like, we've all got a choice to make, and it can be that or it can be the opposite. And it can be as simple as that. And then, of course, once you've made that choice, you've got to follow through with action.
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
And
that's right.
That's
where that purpose and meaning comes into it.
Yeah. When you have a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The last episode we did together, we also spoke, well, obviously, about the unknown. We also spoke about your love of nature and getting out there. This is another one from your Instagram. There's a few, but they're all for meaning. Right?
Funny though, is because for some reason I'm thinking about it's like I'm being triggered by you know when you deep dive your Facebook and then you see things that you posted like 10 years ago.
I haven't got that far back. Promise I haven't.
So cringe worthy.
But now that you've said that,
yes, there's some cringe worthy things.
No, this one I found really cool.
Okay.
Picture of Banff. Watching Banff, Australia always reminds me how important it is to return to nature, but also seek adventure, that which lies beyond our unknown. So I want to talk a little bit about the unknown. And firstly, do you think your sense of adventure and doing some pretty crazy stuff, as you will admit, builds a sense of this, I guess, this tolerance to the unknown?
It's certainly built my tolerance to, I think it makes me appreciate the comforts. So I think what I mean by that is when you're pushing yourself into the unknown, I think that's a place where we can grow. And you learn a lot about yourself. And I reflect on a time, or many times when I've run, and particularly ultras will do it, is, you'll hit the pain cave or you'll hit the barrier. And in recent times, the mantra that always comes to mind is, as painful as this is physically right now, everything's burning, I'm exhausted. Nothing will be as painful as when I wasn't able to do these things. And all I craved was my lungs burning and this feeling of pain. I craved this when I couldn't do it. And I think every time you have a new experience, and I think I'm reflecting on experiences that do push me to the limit, that it's building my pain tolerance for life and everything that life throws at me. And I love new experiences because it just, I want to grow. Yeah. I don't know if that, does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'd love to know though, in terms of limits.
Yeah.
Like how do you train yourself physically and mentally to find that limit? And then how do you kind of get past that each time? Because, you know, I've known you a while and I've seen you do so many of these events and it almost seemed like there was a stage where you just kept getting better and better at each time. So what's that like for you in terms of getting to the pain cave, talking yourself through that, and then knowing that you're going to be better for it? And where's the line?
Yeah. I'm a believer of a couple of things that I think are relevant. One of them is you kind of don't know your potential until you keep pushing. Is kind of why when I choose to do events, I have been very selective about what kind of events I choose to do and what kind of hikes I've chosen to do, because ultimately I've chosen things that there's a chance of failure.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. Things that I do when I sign up for them, there is massive doubt in my mind that I'll be able to complete them. And that's come with some reflection on that.
All right. So you've realized that upon reflection, not in the moment of signing up.
Yeah, no, this is something I've probably learnt about myself over time, is that the thrill of failure is part of what drives me to do these things that I sometimes choose to do, because that's my way of testing my limits.
It's so awesome. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Okay, so based on that, has there been an event where you have failed? These are your words. I wouldn't say that, but
yeah. Well, I mean, the hike that we talked about in the last episode.
Would you go and check that one out?
Check that one out. Yeah. You see how seamlessly I plugged that?
Eileen, only the second time and you're a pro.
Well, that was a huge, definitely there was some doubt about whether we would complete that. Yeah, 100%. And I think of particularly the last couple of ultras that I did before I switched to bouldering, the Buffalo Stampede and then the Hyson 105. The Buffalo Stampede was a pipe dream for many years, and then even more so when I did my left knee, because I perceived it as one of the holy grails of trail running in Australia. It was one of the hardest, steepest ultras in Australia.
Can you just tell us about it for a moment for those who don't know what the Buffalo Stampede is?
It's evolved now, but back when I did it in, I think it was 2019, it was a 77-kilometre ultra through the Victorian Alps. And it was, I believe, kilometre for kilometre, one of, if not the steepest ultras in Australia. So it covers like 4,500 meters of elevation in that 70 Ks, which is like, you know, half the elevation of Everest. Obviously not at altitude, but it's a lot of climbing, basically. And as much as I love trail running, hills are actually not my forte. And so for me, it was a huge challenge that I wondered whether I could overcome. There was a curiosity as to whether my body could withstand the actual event and could I endure the actual event, but then also commit to what was going to be 3 to 4 months of the most grueling training that I would have ever put my body through. And I think I touched on last episode that I'm also not a natural long distance runner either. I'm built to sprint, and so trail running always has been that perpetual challenge for me to push further and further distances, because it's not in my DNA to run longer distances. And that probably is one of the appeals of trail running for me, is that it did always present this challenge for me every time I stepped up to a race, even if it was 10 Ks. That's still longer than I would naturally choose to run. And going back to your previous question of how do you push through those really tough trainings, my coach at the time said something really pertinent that stuck with me and was a mantra through all of those tough trainings and mornings that I woke up and did not feel like, you know, running 30 or 40 Ks in the morning. And he said, the days where you feel most like not doing the training, those are the days that you need to be training. And it's training on fatigue, but it's training your mindset to not give up when it's really shit. There was when I embarked on Buffalo, so I'd signed up for it kind of a little bit reluctantly, but then realized I have a job now, just like with the AC, I've got a job now. I had to do my first training for Buffalo, and it was a 25K training, and it had to cover a certain amount of elevation, which meant I had to basically pick one of the steepest hills in Adelaide, Pengana for those that are in Adelaide and have been scarred by it as well. And I had to basically run up and down it 6 times that day. And I got to the start of the trail and it was pissing down with rain. It was freezing. And I sat in my car and I might have even had to do a quick little anxiety poo. Yeah. We've all been there. All been there. And I got back in the car and I just thought, how easy would it be for me right now? Everyone's at home in bed, curled up under the covers. How easy would it be for me I'm in the car, just turn the car around and drive back home. And I thought to myself then, Eileen, if you do that, you're never going to do this. Like you're never going to stick to this if you do that right now. So after my anxiety poo, got out of the car and spent the next 6 hours training. And I still think, in hindsight, if I had turned around that day, I wouldn't have stuck to the plan, because that day showed me that I did have enough mental fortitude to go, I've got a job. I promised myself I would do this. And I know it's hard work, but I'm not going to give up. And I'll start. And I think that's just so critical. You need to start.
Do you look back on that and go, had you not got out the car, do you think from that moment everything onwards could have painted a very different picture in terms of like who you are today in this moment? Because I think about that a lot in terms of pivotal
those
moments,
crossroad moments.
Yeah.
I definitely felt at that time, and then even on reflection, looking back on that moment, yeah, it felt like a crossroads. It really felt like that was a pivotal decision. And whether it symbolically was anyway for me.
I want to move on to your career, because I think what you do is phenomenal.
It's be quite telling now of how old I am. You've been doing it for a while.
How long have you been doing it?
It was 11 years the other day. As I
How
was
old are you?
32.
Eileen. So old. Right. So
I'm just insulted.
Anyway, back to your career.
Moving right along. I'm turning 33.
Yeah. You're not making things any better.
Digging yourself into a hole.
Right. So tell me, how did you choose the specialist, into neurophysiology? Or physiotherapy, sorry.
It's there's always a story, isn't there? I was one of those really annoying people that
Where's this going? Full stop. Oh, okay. That's a bit harsh, but sure.
Try to edit that into an inspirational.
That's right.
Yeah.
Eileen's affirmations.
Okay. Oh, back on
You're
track.
annoying. Right.
I was always drawn to physiotherapy since I started to think about a career in school. I felt like I was, as were the 99% of the other cohort, was there to become the physio for the crows. I mean, that's what we were all there for, right? And it wasn't until I had a really pivotal experience in the rehab hospital that I was at. And it was a combination of having an incredible mentor, which actually inspired me to be a teacher and a clinical tutor because of her influence all those years ago. And I just remember finishing that placement and thinking, I want to be her. And that has been a big driver for my career, was meeting her. But the other thing was the actual work itself in the rehab hospital. I got to meet people that in that particular setting had like acute strokes and spinal cord injuries, and different neurological conditions. I fell hard in love with it. I have had people ask me why I love it so much. And I think the key is the human connection, in that in rehab, you often it's slower stream. So you get to know the patient for like over years. So that is perhaps in contrast, perhaps to having like an acute neck pain, and you might go in for a couple of sessions with your physio, and then ultimately things improve, which is good, and you might not need to see them for a long time afterwards. But maybe kind of you might be able to relate to this when you've had clients for years. You are part of their story. You're part of their journey and their whole life, and you're so entrenched in that. You're part of that. And I found that extremely unique to rehab compared to, say, like a hospital setting, for instance, or even some of that like sports related physio. I fell in love with it because of the relationships that you developed with patients over a longer period of time, and seeing them a bit more frequently as well. Another pivotal moment was later in my degree. We had like a professional development evening, and we had one of the gurus of neurophysio come to chat to us about management of dizziness. And my mum actually had struggled with dizziness and migraines and those kinds of issues for a long time. And I wasn't actually aware until I had that evening that physios could have a really pivotal role in managing dizziness and migraines. And that was such a revelation for me. And I learned about vestibular physiotherapy that night, which is related to neurophysio. So it's kind of like a subfield of neurophysio. And yeah, that was also a clincher too. I thought I could help my mum. It just hit close. It hit close to home. And both neuro and vestibular physiotherapy are just so interesting. The crux was that I ended up actually getting in contact with the physio who ran that professional development course, this guru who to me, I was a bit starstruck by. Can I just do work experience with you? And he said, well, actually, we're kind of looking for somebody. At the time, they were very small practice. And 11 years on, I'm here, there.
How incredible is that? Like, just the way everything, I mean, I'm a big woo-woo believer in things happen for a reason. And like, you were put on that path and here you are today. And not only are you here today doing good work, like you're doing phenomenal work and changing people's lives, and not only patients, but also people who are in the position that you were in once upon a time and getting to learn this. Mm-hmm. So before we get into the program that you've been developing, mm-hmm. I want to first, can you let everyone know mm-hmm. the kind of the type of patients that you're seeing and what that means and how you go about, I mean, obviously it's how you treat is going to be so individual to
Yes,
everyone. But like,
definitely. Yeah.
what does it look like for you in a day?
So I work in a private neuro physiotherapy practice. So I am a neurological physiotherapist, which means I predominantly see people that have neurological conditions and also vestibular conditions. So neurological conditions are anything that affects your neurological system. That could be your brain, that could be your spinal cord, that could be your nerves, and that those conditions are many and varied. The core conditions that we see would be, for instance, brain injuries, stroke, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, peripheral nerve injuries, motor neurone disease. The list is extensive. And with vestibular conditions, that refers to that's an umbrella term for lots of different conditions and causes for dizziness and balance issues. So those could be conditions that affect your inner ear. That could be migraines. That could be potentially like neck-related conditions or causes. So absolutely, it's the treatment is so varied, but ultimately, when the way that we approach seeing a patient is understanding their life and understanding their goals, helping the patient to achieve those goals. And we know there's a lot of evidence out there that for many of these neurological conditions that we can improve function through rehab, whether that be exercise, and very specific, that's a very broad term, but we're talking, exercise in terms of movement retraining as opposed to not just getting fit. I mean, that's part of it, if that's what they want to do, but improving their capacity, their physical capacity to do what they want to do. So we need to understand what it is specifically that they want to do, because somebody might come in and say they want to, run 10 kilometers, whereas somebody else might want to just be able to, but somebody might want to be able to reach up above their head to open a cupboard. So those goals are equally challenging, relatively speaking. So understanding what the patient's goals are is so critical, because it gives the rehab meaning. And I would say a lot of the time we're also well placed to help to coordinate the patient's overall rehab and care, because we often are the ones that see them the most frequently. So we do a lot of communication with the neurologists and the doctors and other health professionals, and making sure that they're connected to the right people. So we often have that role too, in helping to coordinate and bring together a team for them that is going to support them through their entire rehab.
Can you talk a little about the vestibular system for a moment?
Okay.
Obviously symptoms of loss of balance or dizziness or headaches. What can cause whether it's an injury to the vestibular system or how do these things come about?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of common vestibular conditions that we see. We're still always, so the medical field is still learning about a lot of these conditions. But some of them could be related to age, some of them could be related to injury, some of them spontaneous, or seemingly spontaneous. So, you could develop, there's a condition called, which is abbreviated to BPPV, so benign paroxysmal positional vertigo, hence the abbreviation.
Yeah.
And it is the most common cause of vertigo in our population, so the most common cause for dizziness. And there's still some grey area around what causes BPPV, but anecdotally, it can happen spontaneously. Yes, there are some risk factors for it, like if you actually have like a physical knock to your head. So if you had, a head injury.
Is this long-term injury, or is this something that can heal?
So BPPV, I should probably explain, is where this is. Hope you don't mind. We're going to get technical.
Awesome.
So your so you're in it. So you have. How far do we go back?
Let's do it.
Okay. Vestibular anatomy 101.
Paint us a picture.
Okay. So if you can picture your ear.
Mm-hmm.
And your ear, so this is like your external ear, this is what you can see. And then you've got your ear canal, which kind of crudely is like, where the wax builds up. So that's like your middle ear. And you have your ear drum. So when your doctor looks inside your ear, you should only be able to see your ear canal and your eardrum. If you're seeing what's beyond that, then you've got a perforated eardrum.
What's beyond that?
So this is what I work with, right? So there's a lot beyond that. So you've got your eardrum, and then attached to your eardrum, so imagine on the other side that you can't see, you've got your hearing bones. So your hearing bones are then attached to your vestibular cochlear apparatus, which is this is very technical, about yay big.
For those listening, it's a 5-cent piece?
Probably a bit smaller, maybe
smaller?
Like yay big. And it looks kind of like a snail, but it's like a series of tunnels, or we actually call them, there's like labyrinths. So it's like there's like bony tunnels, and that's located beyond your eardrum, so like in your skull. And that apparatus is important for, part of it is important for your hearing, so that's your cochlea.
Mm.
So when sounds go into your ear and it vibrates your eardrum, it makes your hearing bones move, so vibrate, and then those vibrations are transmitted from those hearing bones to your cochlea, and that's how we hear stuff, is the transmission of those vibrations into your cochlea. But the other part of that apparatus is your vestibular system, and that's filled with liquid. You can't feel this liquid moving around, but because remember, this thing's tiny, and that is partly responsible for your balance and knowing where your head is in space. So when we move our head, so if I close my eyes and I'm moving my head around, I know that my head is moving, partly because our vestibular system is picking up that we're moving our head and telling our brain that. So again, how technical do we want to get? Your vestibular system kind of is like a spirit level, or acts like a spirit level. So you know how a spirit level works. So a spirit level, when you're measuring something up, there's fluid in the spirit level. So when
we're talking alcohol?
No, I'm talking like like a spirit level tool to make sure something's
What's
straight.
A spirit level tool?
What, I don't know if there's another name for it. Just picture this bony labyrinth is filled with liquid.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you move your head, the fluid inside your inner ear is moving, and it's the movement of the fluid, depending on which direction the fluid is moving, that stimulates different parts of your vestibular system to tell us how we're moving our head.
Right.
So we know where our head is all the time,
right,
which is extremely important, because all the important stuff, like your brain and your eyes, are in your head.
Mm.
So it helps us to maintain stability. It helps us to maintain our balance. So there's different conditions that can affect your inner ear. which is what it's called, so vestibular system, inner ear. There are a number of conditions that can affect it, and like I said, BPPV, the one I mentioned before, is the most common cause of acute dizziness. So like waking up and being like, whoa, I feel dizzy. That's the most common cause of vertigo.
What's that doing?
So inside your inner ear, you have, in a particular part of your inner ear, in those tunnels, you have what are called otoconia. We colloquially call them crystals. There are crystals that are stuck on top of like a jelly-like substance, kind of like if you picture like fairy bread.
Okay, yeah.
But like thousands of these tiny, tiny crystals, which you can only really see under a microscope. Those crystals, some of those crystals can sometimes break off the jelly and end up floating around in the liquid. And if they happen to get into the wrong place in your inner ear, then it will stimulate certain parts of your inner ear that then cause dizziness.
Right.
If people come in and we assess them and find that they have BPPV, the treatment is quite mechanical in that we do a number of head maneuvers with them and so basically move their head and their body in a particular position to get the crystals to move back into the place where they're supposed to be. And then they drop back down, settle back down, and then the person's not dizzy anymore.
So these crystals
are
meant to go back to where they were. It's not like the brain or the body flushes it out or anything like that. They just go back.
Well, I mean, technically, if you happen to move in just the right position and get the crystals back into the right spot, then yes, you can feel better. But that is uncommon.
Okay.
The best way to treat that is to get the maneuver done and get the crystals back into the right spot with the maneuvers, and you'll start feeling better.
Yeah.
Once the crystals are back in the right spot and not floating around and wreaking havoc. So that's just one condition. That's the one that we do see a lot of. But there are many other vestibular conditions. So other conditions that affect your inner ear where you can get viruses. You can get less common pathologies with your inner ear that cause, changes in fluid in your inner ear, and that leads to dizziness.
Yeah.
And migraines can cause dizziness as well. And so we're reasoning through all of those different diagnoses.
Wow. Yeah.
And sometimes working together with ENTs and neurologists to figure out what they are in more complex cases.
Could we go back to the crystals for a second?
Just the woo-woo stuff.
No. What you were talking, I don't know the real term.
Yeah.
But why would they go out of place and go floating around? Is that a knock to their head,
that's one very that's one potential cause is a mechanical blow will potentially dislodge these crystals. So we do absolutely screen for it with people that have had like concussions and head injuries, especially if they are reporting dizziness. That would be a flag to check that. But there's still some grey areas around what the potential causes are. Age is a factor because as we age, the jelly stuff that the crystals are stuck on kind of like dries out as we age.
Right.
And obviously if you have other health conditions and other comorbidities like diabetes and your inner ear and your circulation and your neural supply isn't optimally functioning or healthy, then that will accelerate the process potentially.
Yeah.
But then we're still learning about it.
Yeah.
I mean, only recently did they make a association between having low vitamin D levels and people that get this condition on a recurring basis.
Oh, wow.
So that's actually something that has entered like my practice a little bit more like in recent years, that's actually something that I might screen